Welcome back to Tools and Track. It's been a long while coming, but it's finally time for us to do the long awaited how-to. This is how you take the body off of a TVR Chimaera. God help me. So this is a how-to. It has been a long while brewing and it's been put off for lots and lots of various excuses. We're now out of them. I've got a lot of free time and we're at a point now where the car's starting to feel kind of sloppy. There's clunks, there's creaks, they've been on for a while. The extra power from the turbo's not exactly helping. So it's time for us to take the body off. While I've got it off, there's a few other things we want to have a look at. I've got suspicions the diff isn't too happy, so that means it's an easy access one if only to do the bushes on it. While we're at it, we're going to do the brake lines and the fuel lines. Obviously the copper ones will get done, but it's a good chance for us to replace all of those old, probably perished hoses on the fuel side with lovely new ones. Out with that, anything else that I find is going to get done as well. Hopefully it's not a lot. So this gargantuan task has a number of steps. It's not just a case of unbolt all of the bolts that hold the body on and lift it up. There are a number of other parts that will hold this body onto the chassis. So for this guide, I'm going to start at the back, namely at the fuel tank. So the bottom of the fuel tank is held into the body with these two nuts and bolts. And I'll be honest, I'd be as well just putting a big ratchet on it and shearing them now, because they're never going back on again. Oh, I can hear the YouTube comments going wild now. He's actually putting WD on. He thinks they're going to come out. This is certainly one of the stranger experiences of my life. It's actually moving. I mean, obviously the tops are now just spinning and that's what's actually making it move, which I should have guessed. There you go. Round two, I've got a spanner on the top. I'm just going to slowly turn this. Wow. Wonders never cease. So with the top and the bottom nuts out, or nuts and bolts, I've also slackened off the filler neck, which hasn't actually got the gap to come out, but don't worry about that because we're taking the tank off. I think we're going to need to disrupt this. Next thing we're going to have to do is basically pull the tank away. Now there's going to be two things stopping here, the output and the return pipe, which is underneath of the car. So let's have a look at that. So underneath the car, one pipe that goes out and into your fuel pump. The other wee rubber guy above it is the return pipe. It's got a fitting somewhere up there, but we're actually just going to snip the two of these because they're due to get replaced with the body off. But those will need to be detached so you can get your fuel tank out. With those two bottom hoses snipped or removed or whatever takes your fancy, I've actually taken my cover off just so I can cap this so it's not constantly venting fuel. You'll have a fitting in the back, this guy, which I've disconnected. Pull your carpet back here. You'll have a fuel gauge clip, which pops up and round the back of the tank. There's one last cheeky little hose, which I suspect is going to fight me. No, now we can pull it out. Indeed. This is for your fuel pump, and on the other side of this you will find absolutely nothing that will fit through this hole. So there is a very, very simple modification you can do. That's later Tommy's problem. So with the tank out of the way, you'll be left with a bolt here and the same on the other side. This will be the first of the chassis bolts. It looks like a 17, I think. Oh, nice. There I go. Hey. Two. Just before you finish things off in the boot, there are two cheeky little bolts that you might struggle to find, simply because one of them is an earth that's hidden behind a bit of silicon, or at least it is in mine, and they are not normal bolts. They are Allen cap bolts. So with a 6 bolt, once you know they move, you can bring in some help from the yanks. Next, you now have to put the car up in the air because we're moving on to the interior. Step 1, take out your seats. God damn it, I'll just put these in. I wouldn't say it was absolutely essential that you have to take your carpets out, but I reckon we can add another thing onto the shopping basket. Now that we're into the interior, things are getting a little bit trickier. Reason being, a lot of the bolts that we're taking out now don't sit into the chassis, they're exposed to the elements. So we're starting with the seat belt assembly at this point. The first one, which you'll find down here, is for the seatbelt retainer latch. This is this guy out. Normally about a 16mm, I've had to hammer on a 15, mainly because my roof clearly leaks and the floor pan of the driver's side has been completely covered in water. So this looks like something from the wreck of the Titanic. We'll be replacing this before it goes back in. The next one you want to remove is its opposite end. That is the seatbelt base mount. This one wasn't too bad, and I'll stipulate this is because it does sit into the tube of the chassis rather than being exposed to the elements, much like its brother on the other side. As long as you can get a socket onto it, this should come out fairly easily. The last one, however, if you look into the reel, it sits at the bottom in like this. You want to be getting a spanner or a ratchet or something to lock into this bolt. And on the other side, in the wheel well here, you'll get another end. In this case I used a pretty substantial impact gun to get the nut off. Now, this will cause you problems. This sits right in the face of the rear wheel and will be subject to corrosion. Ironically enough, the nut's the least problematic part I've got here. I'll probably have to replace this whole assembly as well. Another add to shopping cart. We cracked on a wee bit and not really bothered filming too much of it because, let's be honest, who needs to see me making sparks with an angle grinder anymore? We have now removed all of the floor pan bolts for the driver's side that hold the bottom of the chassis onto the outriggers. That being the big problem area we've got with corrosion. You will find 2 bolts at the front where your heels sit. A further 2 bolts where the backs of your legs are, here and here. 1 bolt, not 2, directly behind this on the outside outrigger. And then lastly, a further 2 bolts sitting where your arse is. I did attempt to try and be diplomatic and take these out with a wrench, but it is a no-go. Not simply because the bottom of the car has nuts that sit exposed to the elements, finding all the wash of the day, but as I said earlier on, it would seem that the inside of my car has seen a bit of water as well. There's absolutely no saving these bolts. Little bit of a heads up on how I did this. Here's one example bolt. As you can see, I have taken a cut straight off the side through the nut of where this sits through on the other side on the floor. That's chopped any bind the nut will have on the bolt, and I've been able to put on a gun. Nice. And this is taking them out a lot easier. As we're replacing these nuts and bolts, it doesn't matter. We are nearly done with the interior, nearly. So once you've got the floor pan bolts out and all your seatbelt bolts out, there are 2 remaining bolts inside the car, which you need to remove. Following that, we're onto the engine bay. So, follow me. Bolt 1, and excuse the mess of the carpet, I've finally resolved myself to the fact that it is going to get replaced. If you look for the gear stick, there'll be a little pyramid type thing. Find the front of that, and after it, the padding can be nicked down. There's bolt number 1, 17mm spanner only. Be aware as well, there's a number of earths that go onto this. Try not to forget to put them on, as I'm bound to do when we're doing the rebuild, and then swearing and cussing when nothing works. The passenger side looks like this. So that's under the dash, and it's basically in line with where your wee pocket would be. And again, we are holding a number of earths on this too. I think we'll go ratchet spanner for this one. Make life a bit easier. A lot easier. The good news is there's only 2 bolts left that we need to attack. They sit underneath the radiator and hold the front clam of the car onto the chassis. The bad news is that unfortunately doesn't mean we're ready to lift the body. We'll need to disconnect every single bit of loom and hold that out of the way. That goes through somewhere about down there. Thankfully this isn't something that's going to daunt me too much, because this might be the 15th time I've had to disconnect the loom. The joys of having a turbo conversion. Other points to note, we'll obviously need to disconnect all these vac lines that run through the bodywork, all these cables such as throttle and engine release, and principally everything else that has an hydraulic flow, such as the clutch and all the brake lines. Thankfully, TVR made this quite simple. There's a transit block down here that has all of the unions for these in one handy little location. What we will need to do though is mark up which is which, so that when it comes time to put it back together, we know that we don't pump the brake and find that the clutch disengages. The other things that we'll need to look at, if we're taking the bolts out from underneath the radiator, we'll be as well removing the radiator completely. Another point but to note there is that there's 2 radiator lines that go from the bodywork onto the engine, so they'll need to come off anyway. And a problem that wouldn't affect any car other than mine, boost lines. So we'll have a boost line going out from the turbo on the hot side, and another boost line that comes in on the cold side. To be honest, I think the cold side one will just take straight off the manifold and lift all of that with the body. So that should hopefully save us a bit of trauma. Can't see anything else that we're going to get hit with, but I'm sure I've forgotten 1 or 2 or 8 things. Let's get going. Just about to start there, and I forgot one pretty crucial thing on that extensive list of stuff that I'll need to remove. That's a 2-man job. Time to make a phone call. Next up, we need to break these 2 UG clips off so we can remove the steering rack. That's got to come with the body. So part 2 of taking the steering rack out is a bit more involved. At the very bottom you will see a flange with 5 M8 bolts. Buzz gun them off because using a ratchet will be far too slow. And up the top here you'll see a couple of 13mm bolts, one of which I've left in just to hold the rack in place. Knock them out, and that's more or less the rack off the car. Obviously the shaft running through the middle will still be attached, but with the space that you've now made, you'll be able to chap it off. Particularly necessary on old rust shonkers like mine, because that does get quite tight. As you can see, I've chapped in a wee screwdriver just to help things along a bit. But once you've got it slack and you've got the freedom of movement, it will move. The bonnet release catch is an easy one. You can either take it off with 2 13mm here, or if you get a 10mm spanner, you can undo the adjuster on it, like so. A little point of note, it's usually wise, if you're not taking the entire latch off, to do so with the bonnet off first. Because if the bonnet drops and clicks on the latch, and you've taken the cable off, you're going to have a bad day. I, in this instance, have left the bonnet on and the catch on, because I like to live dangerously. all that way just to take off a throttle cable? Afraid so, oh boy. This will not be, I guarantee it, a 7mm in your car. It will, however, be a little clevis pin, but mine has long since been lost, and over the years this has just worked. However, this might be the time I finally get around to swapping it. Similarly, it might not, so you know, don't get your hopes up. Gotta give you boys something to moan about in the comment section, haven't I? And before anyone says, oh, that's just a nut and bolt, that will end up falling off, it sure as shit hasn't so far, so get up you. You may think taking the inlet manifold off for the sake of removing a throttle cable was a bit overkill, and you'd possibly be right, but there's more things that I need to do that require the inlet manifold to be off, such as removing all of the loom. So all the injectors and whatnot hide underneath, because A, it was an original route for it, and B, I like to tuck loom wherever I can, because as you can tell, I'm a fan of a really neat and tidy engine bay. Alright guys, what's next? Crank position sensor. Oh, will I get that from here? This bit's now. It's a boy! It's crowning. Stupid thing. There we go. Crank position sensor. Without too much language employed. Some more tasks that most folk will not need to do on a TVR. Remove your boost lines. Obviously leaving them at the front of the nose cone is a great permanent solution and will cause no problems in the future. So we're just about to break off our brake and clutch lines. However, before we do, we're obviously going to lose a lot of fluid here. So, little top tip. And that will reduce a lot of cheese that will land on the floor as you'll be giving this off. To stop any schmutz, as the skid boys say. At the back of the engine you'll have the two fuel lines which go in, feed and return. As you can see, I no longer need to change my fuel lines, so I've just snipped that and turned it back to stop any drippage. And you'll also have the two heater hoses. As you can see, I put the top one off, the bottom one's putting up a fight. So in the interest of making sure that I am doing the right thing, I'm just going to go and snip this one off too. That way I have to change the heater hoses, which should be done anyway. And that is what a disconnected transit block should look like. All the brake ones were 11mm, I'm sure it was an imperial size, but I ain't looking it up. And the clutch, for me, was a 13mm. However, it might not be in yours because I have replaced my clutch line at some point in the past and I might have just used whatever was lying around, so always worth a wee double check. I've got the radiator out. I'm not really going to get into the nitty gritty with this because we've taken it in and out so many times before in previous videos, nobody needs to see it. Your last two bolts, you can just see the air strap on the first one there, 17mm, and the same over there, 17mm. Come on, focus you wee bastard. Good news everyone, back in the cockpit again. So we have got all the loom disconnected, all the chassis bolts disconnected, but we still need to do a few more things. First up, there is loom that sits in the cockpit that goes through to the chassis. There's a reverse light switch, I'm sure, and definitely a fuel pump, and probably other things that I've not even considered. I've got a Serpentine model Chimaera, and because it runs a T5, it has an access panel here, which I'm hoping will make life so easy that we'll be able to disconnect the handbrake from here and say no more about it. There's every chance that won't be the case, and I will go back to hating life. What's under that trapdoor? I have found 1, 2, 3, and I've split pinned in the bottom that actually acts on the handbrake for the handbrake lever. Okay. Taking the access panel off has helped us with the handbrake lever. What it has not solved, however, is lume. So down here, still have a grommet that passes lume through into the front of the car, probably to the gearbox, and there's no plugs. So I'm going to have to go down at the gearbox and disconnect anything that might be associated with this. Similarly, we have two cables here at my Oxter that pass through towards the rear of the car, and there's no plugs at all. That's about the only problems we still see at the moment, so all going well. If I can find the sources of these, that completes the strip down and we're ready to lift. The only problem I'm going to have now is I did think I could get away with not splitting my exhaust. I think the exhaust is going to have to come off. Not only because it's going to be in the way of wiring, but the two tailpipes are going to protrude far beyond the back end of the chassis, and I don't know if you've had a look around the unit that I've got here. It's not exactly the most spacious place, so I think regardless, we'll take the exhaust off. With the exhaust off, we were able to easily work this one out. One of these is a handbrake illumination switch, which was fairly easily to disconnect, fairly easily. I am good England. And the other one holds on the reverse switch. This innocuous looking guy is actually for the speed sensor. And I've traced the wire right the way back to the speed sensor, and lo and behold, there is no plug. So you guesses what we're going to do with that. There'll be a plug now. Adios, wee guy. That is the end of the prep for removing the body. Total time taken between 4 and 5 hours. This will vary for yourself, of course, depending on how much rust that you're facing. Mine wasn't easy, so you know that's probably going to be a fair representation. Stay tuned. The next episode we're going to be lifting the body off and having a look to see exactly how severe this project's going to be. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you next time.